And I would just like to introduce Brother Joe. His talk today is The Great Sifter, and he does not have a reading, so I'll give it right over to Brother Joe.
Thank you. Wolf, are you able to get on the screen? Great. Good morning, everyone. I know, I didn't know this was still on. Do we turn this one off? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I was excited to talk to you today about this topic. I've been working on it for about 2 months. It's called The Great Sifter, and I wanted to take a historical look at how the Lord has moved the pieces on earth using different plagues from the past to enact his will. So I'll start off with this one, which is from Proverbs chapter 20, verse 8. It says, "A king sitting on a throne to judge sifts out all evil with his eyes." And we know that Solomon did this, and in the same way the Lord does this. He sifts out the truth from the nations all the time, and we can see it not only in natural disasters, but also with plagues and epidemics. So this verse from Isaiah really sort of encapsulates this whole idea of him sifting the earth, separating the righteous from the wicked and the nations. It says, "Look, Yahweh comes from far away. His anger is burning and heavy with smoke. His lips are full of fury, and his tongue is like a consuming fire. His breath is like the overwhelming torrent that rises to the neck. He comes to sift the nations in a sieve of destruction and put the bridle on the jaws of the people to lead them astray." So right here in Isaiah, it really talks about him literally sifting the nations to separate them and to accomplish his will, and to bring about destruction for the wicked and salvation for the righteous. And the next one is from Amos 9:9, is quite famous. "For surely I will command and I will sift the house of Israel among all the nations, as grain is sifted from a sieve, yet not the smallest grain shall fall to the ground." I would take that today, meaning that not one Jew will be left in another country. They'll all be brought back to the nation of Israel over time. From Haggai, it says, "For the Lord of hosts says, once more in a little while I am going to shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations, so that all the treasures of all the nations will come, and I will sift this house with glory." So I think what he's saying there is what we see in Zechariah 14. All the wealth of all the nations is going to be sifted out of the nations and someday brought back to Jerusalem to build his house. Says the Lord of hosts, "The silver and the gold belongs to me. This is the declaration of the Lord of hosts. The final glory of this house will be greater than the first, says the Lord of hosts. I will provide peace in this place. This is the declaration of the Lord of hosts." He says it 3 different times, that he's going to sift out the wealth of the nations and bring it to his home. In Habakkuk 3, this is Habakkuk's third prayer. It says, "Lord, I have heard the report about you. Lord, I stand in awe of your deeds. Revive your work in these years. Make it known in these years. In your wrath, remember mercy. God comes from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His brilliance is like light, rays of flashing from his hands. This is where his power is hidden. Plague goes before him, and pestilence follows in his steps. He stands and shakes the earth. He looks and startles the nations. The age-old mountains break apart, and the ancient hills sink down. His pathways are ancient." So in this one, it kind of combines the natural disasters that are going on the earth with pestilence and with plague, and basically talks about how he is going to direct the path of mankind on the earth. So in Hebrew and Greek, there are 2 different verbs in the in the Hebrew to start off with. It's to offer, to present, to shake back and forth, or to shed abroad. So it's another way is it's casting as well. In the Strong's for the Greek, it has the meaning of to sift or shake with a sieve, dropping the figure by the inward agitation as to try one's faith. So I thought that was very interesting as well. We also have to consider that the Lord is the master of everything on earth, and it all belongs to him. And Job sort of brings this to the forefront when the Lord is speaking directly to Job. He says, "Who enclosed the sea beyond doors when it burst from the womb? When I made the clouds and the garment a thick darkness, its blanket. When I determined its boundaries and put its bars and doors in place. When I declared, you may come this far, but no farther. You proud waves, stop here." So we know that he has control over this. He says, "You have traveled the sources of the sea or walked in the depths of the oceans. Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the extent of the earth? Tell me if you know all of this." And this is his message to the Lord. And today it's snowing, and he's in charge of the snow and the hail. It says, "You have entertained the storehouses of the snow, or seen where the hail is stored, which I have reserved for tribulation to come, for the day of battle and for war. Where is the lightning diffused, or the east wind scattered around the earth?" So we know he's in charge of that as well. And we also know that he's in charge of the storm. It says, "Who cuts canals for storms and floods, the paths for lightning and thunder, to bring rain upon the land without inhabitants, a desert in which no human beings live, to satisfy the desolate and devastated desert, causing it to sprout with vegetation." So we know that all these belong to him, as well as the ice around the world. And it says, "Does the rain have a father? Who fathered the dew? Does the womb break forth the ice? Who gives birth to the frost out of an empty sky? When water solidifies like stone, and the surface of the deepest sea freezes." So he knows in charge of all things on earth. And this is the analogy I would bring forth, is that the nations are the pieces on a chessboard. He moves them about, however he is going to bring about his will. From the statue we have of Nebuchadnezzar all the way to present day, it's been predicted what's going to happen. So when we start looking at how the Lord has used pestilence in the past, we have lots of examples from the Bible. And the first one I would give you is the 10 plagues of Egypt. And I'm not going to go deep into this. I'm just going to cover them all in 2 slides. And the point is that not only did they walk away with 430 years of wealth that they worked for, that they accumulated for the Egyptians, and they took it all out in one night, but also they defeated all of their gods. And we can see this at the first plague. The Nile was the source of their power, and Nunam was the guardian of the river source. Hapti was the god of the annual flooding of the river and the lord of the fish. And Osiris had the Nile as his bloodstream. So all 3 of those major gods were knocked out by the first plague. Altogether, the Egyptians had over 4,300 gods after doing a lot of research. So it's an incredible pantheon of gods that they worshipped. The plague of frogs, Hept was the Egyptian goddess with the head of a frog. So that one knocked out that god. In the 3rd plague of gnats, Geb was the god over the dust of the earth. So again, that one was defeated. In the 4th plague, Krepti has the head of a beetle and also moved with the sun. He was taken out. And you also see that with the cattle. Hathor was the fertility goddess, who is often depicted as the head with horns and a bull, sometimes a bull wearing a symbol of Hathor. So just in the first 5, you can see how many were taken out. And then the rest, Isis was the god of health, and Imhotep was the god of healing. Both of those were taken out with the plague of the boils. You see that Nut was the goddess of the sky, and her father, Shu god, was the wind and air. Both were taken out by the hail in plague 7. The locust was Hepter and Nepri. They were the goddess of grain, and Set was the god of disorder. And it continues all the way until we get to Ra, the sun god, because of the darkness that was taken out. And lastly, the plague of all the Egyptians dying was quite overwhelming as the final judgment on Pharaoh, who was also considered a god. So we also have the example of the Philistine plague. So during one of the darkest periods of their history, they send the Ark of the Covenant out to battle. It gets captured by the Philistines. Starts rotating through all of the Philistine major towns. What's really amazing to me is that the first town, Ashdod, gets this thing and they put it in their temple, the temple of their god Dagon. What happens to Dagon? He falls down and worships overnight the Ark of the Covenant, and they set it back up. The next day, he's fallen down again. The big news is that the people of the town started getting what we now know was the Black Plague or bubonic plague. They call it the Black Plague because parts of your body turn black as it deteriorates. And so the whole community was affected by these tumors, and it travels as a disease in fleas on rats to humans using another host source. So the whole community was terrorized by the tumors and affected everybody. So they took the Ark of the Covenant to Gath, and they had an outbreak. And it keeps happening in all the cities. Finally, one city is intelligent enough to say, don't bring it here. Let it go somewhere else. So it's interesting because it's been studied in so many different medical journals, even including the CDC, which I was surprised about. Fossilized remains of the plague flea have been found in large numbers in Aramana, Egypt. And since Aramana was occupied for only a few years, we can date the contact between human beings and the plagues. So it's very interesting that they're able to identify it even using science and archaeology today. And the plague is literally written about in many other sources from 1 Samuel and how it affected it. The end result is that the entire Philistine kingdom, including the 5 major cities, now knew that the real God was the God of the Hebrews. Dagon, their God, was completely demoralized. Here he is, fallen down. They showed respect for the God of the Hebrews, and they sent the ark back to them with 5 golden rats and 5 golden tumors as a peace offering. And that was the brain trust of the Philistines when they said, don't send it back empty, send it back with an offering. So just from the Bible, we have a lot of different ones, but I'm not going to get into all of those. I'm going to cover some of the major ones since then. Many of them are actually written about in Revelations, where it says, okay, this plague is going to happen on the earth. I've only got, I think, 1 or 2 tied in with Revelations, but I want to show you these by size to sort of give you a picture of it. So the Black Death one is still the one that is the largest. It's 200 million deaths, and it was from 1347 to 1357. It's called either the Black Death or the bubonic plague. Then smallpox was 56 million. Spanish flu was in 1918 and 1919. That was global. The smallpox epidemic, I will get into it. It's the second largest. I bet nobody even knows what it was. It was in 1520. It's when Cortez went to Central America and spread the European diseases all over the native population. It wiped out that many people in North and South America. And then the plague of Justinian, we're going to be talking about, basically caused the beginning of the demise of the Roman Empire. So all these, I'm not studying them to be macabre. I'm studying them to show you how the Lord changed the surface of the earth and rearranged the nations by using them. And the next slide, this is kind of important because it takes us from AIDS in the top left-hand corner down to SARS in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm not going to get into all of them. I will just show you that COVID has moved from third to last to being between the 17th century Great Plagues and the Asian flu, because we're at basically over 2 million that have died between the two. So this gives you a great layout of all of the plagues of history on just 2 slides. Going back to 3000 BC, one of the earliest ones was in China, and they've recently discovered this with archaeology, and it was discovered, it was a 5,000-year-old plague, which is pretty amazing. And they found a whole cavern filled with skeletons. This one is interesting because the Athenian plague, there's a lot of videos on it. I've watched several of them. But what's incredible is it basically caused the end of the Greek Empire being global. It started to shrink after that. And this was after Sparta and Athens had been fighting for many years. It was once again a ship that came in from another country and brought the disease to them. And the epidemic was quite overwhelming. They basically could not keep up with the body count. They had to give up, and they just wound up throwing their bodies into different towers because they had filled all the graveyards and all the pits around the city. So they finally just gave up with that. The other big outcome of this was that the plague caused the collapse of their faith in the gods of the Parthenon. Parthenon. And they basically felt like the gods had turned against them and were helping the Spartans. It ended the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. The epidemic killed upwards of 1/3 of the population, somewhere numbering between 250 to 300,000 in the 5th century BC. By most accounts, the plague which struck Athens was the most lethal episode of illness in that period in classical Greek history. So it caused the complete downturn of the Grecian Empire and the rise of the Roman Empire. So after this, we have the Antonine Plague, which is pretty unbelievable because of how it changed the face of Rome. They also could not stop the plague, and it was predicted actually in Revelations chapter 6, verse 3, the second seal. When I opened the second seal, I heard a second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse went out, and a red fiery one, and the horseman was empowered to take peace from the earth, so they would slaughter one another, and a large sword was given to him. So that is another one that's pretty amazing. Walter, I'm not quite sure how to get to the notes over here and slide down. Oh, well. I don't see a cursor on here. Anyway, so the results of the Antonine Plague were numerous. They affected the ancient Roman traditions, also leaving a mark on the artistic aspect of renewal, spirituality, and righteousness was recorded. These events created the conditions for the spread of the monotheistic religions such as Mithraism and Christianity. So that's the big news about the Antonine Plague, if you want to remember it, is that it basically changed the course of religions, and a lot of people went towards Christianity after this happened. This period, also characterized by health and social economic crisis, paved the way for the entry of the empire neighboring barbarian tribes for recruitment of barbarian troops into the Roman army. These particularly favor the culture and political growth of these populations. The Antonine Plague may well have created the conditions for the decline of the Roman Empire and afterwards the fall of the West in the 5th century AD. So we're going to get to the Justinian Plague, but the Antonine Plague started the downhill spiral of the Roman Empire. And most importantly, think of the Antonine Plague as the one that helped Christianity gain a foothold and spread throughout the empire. The one after that is the Plague of Cyprian, and it's 250 to 271. And they had such a horrible time with this that many pits were buried, and they burned the victims because they couldn't get rid of them fast enough. And you can see the paintings and illustrations of how bad the death was. But it spread so quickly from the main city of Thebes and elsewhere that they literally had to burn everything in order to purify it. The big results of this plague and how it affected the world, the disease episode of the mid-200s caused political, military, and economic and religious upheaval. It caused the death of 2 emperors, both Justinian in 251 BC and Claudius II. The instability and attacks this period between the emperors witnessed political instability as rivals struggled to claim hold of their throne. The lack of leadership and depletion of soldiers from the ranks in Roman legion contributed to the deteriorating conditions of the empire, weakened Rome's ability to fend off external attacks. There's also the urban flight issue. People just left the cities in droves because there was no place to stay in the city without getting infected. And there was an agricultural collapse because there wasn't enough people to actually do the planting and the harvesting. So we can see why we have these same things going on today. They certainly were here with the Cyprian plague in 250 AD. The plague of Justinian was blamed on him, but he did everything he could to try to fix it, except he kept the taxes going. But it ravaged the entire known world at this time. The plague epidemic is named for Justinian I, who ruled the Eastern Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, at the time of the initial outbreak. Indeed, it is said of Justinian himself caught the disease, but he eventually recovered. And we can see here the huge amount of land that was actually infected by the Justinian plague, and it went on for a while. And they were up to 10,000 people per city per day that were getting this disease and dying. It was, most believe, either the bubonic plague or another one that was closely related. So here's another one of the pits that they were talking about in 451 AD. They have killed as many as 25 million. Now scientists say that the outbreak probably originated in Asia, not in Egypt, as contemporary or more recent chronologicals have thought. The finding comes from analysis of DNA found in 137 human skeletons unearthed in the Eurasian steppe. So it's interesting because all they had before was the historians of the past to tell us what's happened, and now they can go back with DNA research and find out what else was going on. The outbreak in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul in Turkey, was thought to have carried by the city by rats on grain ships arriving from Egypt. While the plague was present in Northeast Africa, the new research makes an origin of Central and East Asia more likely. The researchers said the plague probably moved westward at the migration of tribes who would become known as the Roman chroniclers of the Hun. And these are the big, far-reaching effects of the Justinian plague, and what I want you to try to take away from it. It began at 541 and swept through Europe, killing up to a quarter of the Eastern Mediterranean population and possibly as much as 10% of the world's population. Procopulus said the plague killed 10,000 people every day, but modern estimates put the daily deaths closer to 5,000. Justinian wasn't the leader, he was the conqueror. By 542, he had reconquered most of the Romans' previous domain and was hoping to solidify his rule. And here's what happened. He tried to expand and take back over the territory, and the plague stopped everything. It made all of it impossible as farmers and soldiers and other key members of society fell ill and died from the plague and disease. By 568, Justinian's empire began to crumble as the Lombards invaded northern Italy, and within a few generations, enemies were at the gate. Byzantium remained a power through 1453, but would never again be as large as it had been before the plague. So we saw with the Athenian plague how it basically wiped out the Grecian Empire from its world domination, and the plague of Justinian was the third major plague that Rome experienced, and it basically crippled the nation from world domination. And it basically, the Goths, Visigoths, Lombards came down from the northern Germanic tribes, and it could easily attack them. The same was true of Cortez. By the time he spread his disease in Central and South America, it was a cakewalk to take the rest of the continent because their diseases were the enemy more so than swords. So we can see on a map here the contextual resources of the dates, place our black dots, and the cemeteries where plague DNA has been found in human remains are designed with colored squares. I know that's difficult to see, but it's incredible with the plague of Justinian how far-reaching it was and how many people passed away. In the Black Death, which is also known as the bubonic plague, it spread everywhere. This is the dance of death to the left, and below is another major image showing its devastation and what took place. This is the major pathway to Europe and how it came across from 1347 all the way through the 1350s. So you can see it's traveling from Asia and from the Middle East and Africa up into Europe and the pathways that it took. This is the bigger map, the global map, basically in 1350 of the entire area that was affected by it from 1346 to 1353. It swept through everything. We usually think about it as just a European disease, but there's been more research by a professor from Harvard University. His name is Stuart Borsch, and he has basically penned different essays about this, showing its effect just in the Middle East. So here you can see from Cairo to Aleppo to Damascus and Gaza, how many people died of the Black Plague just in the Middle East and what a huge effect it had. And here's the big takeaways of the Black Death. It unfortunately caused intense anti-Semitism against the Jews. There was a wave of violence against them and pogroms that ensued because, once again, what were they looking for? A scapegoat. This horrible thing happened to us. Somebody has to be to blame. And here it was again. The economy was devastated in many different places. The study of contemporary archives suggests mortality varied from different remains between 1/8 to 2/3 of the population. So it's pretty amazing how many people were washed away in this. The population in England was about 1,400, was perhaps half of what it had been 100 years earlier, and its country alone. And Black Death certainly caused the depopulation of the total disappearance of about 1,000 different villages. This is the flea up here that basically was infected, got on the rats, caused this to spread from one place to another. Here we go back to the Caucasian epidemic from 1545 to 1548. I would say it probably spread far beyond this, but this is one of the Aztec ruins where this took place, sort of the epicenter of the disease. And it happened when Cortez and his men came to the city. They didn't spread just one disease, they spread almost all the European diseases, which they had no immunities for. And it was catastrophic. It depopulated Central America, North America, South America within a number of years. I was actually in an anthropology class, and we had to read this book called Vectors of Death. And it was this woman who was a PhD in anthropology, and she gave formulas for how these diseases just completely wiped out the populations in these places and changed the course of action forever. Cortez, with his 500 men, then headed into the Mexican interior. The region was home to the Aztec civilization and empire of an estimated 16 million people at the time. Through a system of conquest and tribute, the Aztecs has established a great island city of Teotihuacan in the Lake Texcoco, which ruled over about 8,000 square miles. I've actually been there, climbed the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Moon. It's an incredible place, and it was a massive city center like Mexico City is today. Although Cortez was a skilled leader, he and his force of perhaps 1,000 Spaniards and indigenous allies could not have been able to overpower the city of 200,000 without help. They got it in the form of the smallpox epidemic that gradually spread through the coast of Mexico and decimated the densely populated city of Teotihuacan in 1520, reducing the population by 40% in a single year. So that's half of that population just dying in 1 year. And that's not even saying what it did when it spread north and spread south. So they hit the central area between two major continents, and it just spread virally up and down from there. And it's 56 million that died from just Cortez's influence. In America, we have so many different situations of this, not just that one, but also yellow fever and malaria, which affected New Orleans and Philadelphia and many others. The plague was held in check in London by the Great Fire that happened in 1666, and Sir Christopher Wren, with a royalty at the time, redesigned the whole city of London, built more than 600 churches, straightened all the roads, turned it from a medieval mess into a modern city. But the plague completely devastated that part of London, and it was a major outbreak that Charles II barely could control. And the fire basically was the thing that cleaned up the city because of how the spread would not be stopped. There was also the Great Plague of Marseille from 1720 to 1723. Up to 30% of the population died as a result of the plague and epidemic. It had a lot of side effects as well. You can see here some of it. The Great Plague of Marseille was the last major outbreak of the bubonic plague in Western Europe. Arriving in Marseille around 1720, the disease killed a total of 100,000 people, with 50,000 of the city during the next 2 years, and another 50,000 to the north in the surrounding provinces and towns. Of course, it hit the economy and spread out from that area after that. There was also a Russian plague during 50 years later, and here we have the portrait of Catherine II. Even Catherine the Great of Russia could not bring Russia back from the devastation caused by the 1770 plague. It was just incredible what it did to Europe and to Asia at that time. Philadelphia also suffered from a major plague of yellow fever that stopped the city in its tracks. They had people going through the city with carts to clean up everything and try to purify the city. They thought that cleanliness was the only way to get out of the mess. Of course, in all these major plagues of the past, they always thought either the gods were angry with them and they needed to do something different, but they never knew what to do to change. The flu pandemic of the late Victorian period was another one that was pretty interesting because it had a large effect in Paris and in Europe at the time. And then there's another one that comes a little bit later. To the right is a wood engraving showing nurses attending the patients in Paris during the 1889 and to 90 flu epidemic. It killed an estimated 100 people. I don't know if you can see this woman at the bottom, but she's wear a mask or go to jail. So that's her great-great-grandparents telling you that. You can see with the Spanish flu, which wasn't really from Spain, but anyway, it lasted from 1918 through 1920. It killed as many people as World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and our modern Gulf Wars together. So in case you thought it was just, a passing thing, it was 500 million people who died of this disease. And you can see it's far-reaching. This is the earlier one, sorry. The next one is the polio pandemic from 1916 to 1954. This one's personal to me because my grandfather got polio when he was 4 years old. They told him he'd never walk again. He had to learn to walk and do everything on his own, and he did a phenomenal job. But it also affected President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was so affected by it, he started a whole place in Georgia for kids to come, like a summer camp, for training and to strengthen themselves and to change. But it was a very serious pandemic for quite a long time. Thank goodness now we have the polio vaccine, so we don't have this destruction anymore. One of the other ones that was quite concerning more recently was the H1N1 swine flu epidemic and its effect from Africa to all over the world and Asia, and how it was transferred from ticks to livestock to humans and its effects. We also have the West African Ebola virus epidemic, which was very lethal, but it killed so quickly that it spread was luckily somewhat contained. Healthcare workers here are putting on protective gear before entering the Ebola treatment until the Liberia during a 2014 outbreak of Ebola. You can see on the right-hand side the nations that were involved, including Sudan and many others. The Zika virus from 2015 to the present is still a huge concern, and it's spread by mosquitoes and has a lot of health risks associated with it. So my point is not to categorize all of these, but to basically say, Christ said, in the last days, his disciples, what will be the sign of your return? He says all these things, earthquakes in various places, wars and rumors of wars, and pestilence. I'm showing you so many that are back to back in the last century, really, that have been devastating, and we're having another one now. And the spread of the Zika virus was North America, South America, obviously part of Europe, the middle part of Africa, and Southern Asia. So you can see its effects. So now we're going to talk just for a moment about COVID. I realize this is a landmine, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, and I have no intent in going into conspiracy theory. I am just going to focus on the statistics of how it has affected the world. So this is the death toll per nation, as you can see around the world. And this is how it has happened over time. I know that's a little bit light, but it includes Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, and Oceania. You can see how they compare on this map. This is how it's affected different career paths, I would say. And this is negative. So 3% for IT, 4% for finance, 12% for HR. Supply chain has been affected by 16%, production by 27%, and sales by 37%. So you can see how it's just constantly impacting business and changing the course of not having enough supply. We've all gone to the grocery store and seen what items have been out over the last year that are very hard to get. And it's very interesting the huge impact that it has had on sports. People used to go to every kind of game imaginable, and now they're having to rethink that. That, I would say, distraction has been moved away, and you can see what a huge change it's had. It's also had a huge impact on public debt. You can see from 2007 till we get to 2019, 2020, there's a huge jump. And there's a prediction of what 2021 will bring until 2025. Restrictions on travel have been huge. The airlines, in many cases financially, are barely holding on. Most people won't even take Americans overseas, especially Europe, because of the travel restrictions against us, but also against England. And as the COVID basically mutates, we have different versions now in South Africa, in the UK, and I believe in Brazil and some other countries. So it's constantly morphing. It's also impacted the global startup scene, whether it's gaming or social media or artificial intelligence and big data, agitech and new foods, automotive, beauty and fashion, and travel and tourism. These areas are all negatively affected here. It's just by what percentage they've been impacted. So business has been hugely impacted by this. Here's the impact on education. And this is just in March. This is old news, but it was 1.38 billion back then. I'm sure it is far beyond that. It's probably 4 or 5 times beyond that now. Also, this is a very good comparative chart, and it shows the rates as they compare from COVID to the seasonal influenza to the one that existed in 1918. And you can see the reproductive number, the attack rate, the case fatality, as well as infectious rates and the US death totals. So it's pretty amazing to see comparing one with the other from the years, and the numbers for COVID are pretty staggering in comparison. So I want to talk about our hope in the last little piece of this. Obviously, Solomon was a very wise man, and he puts in his prayer to the Lord during the dedication of the temple, it says, when there is famine on the earth, and there is pestilence, when there is blight, mildew, locust, or grasshopper, when the enemy besieges them in the regions of their fortified cities, and there is a plague or illness, whatever prayers or petition any one of your people, Israel, might have, with each man knowing his own affliction and spreading out his hands towards this temple, may you hear in heaven, your dwelling place, and may you forgive, act, and repay the man according to all of his ways, since you know his heart. For you alone know every human heart, so that they may fear you all the days that they live on the land, and you gave to our ancestors. So he's saying right here, if we turn to the Lord during these times, he will act and save us. And that's really captured, and I know many of you all have seen this from Psalms 91. It's extremely powerful. It says, the one who lives Under the protection of the Most High dwells in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. He himself will deliver you from the hunter's net, from the destructive plague. He will cover you with his feathers. You will take refuge under his wings. His faithfulness will be a protective shield. You will not fear the terror of the night, or the arrow that flies by day, the plague that stalks in darkness, or the pestilence that rages at noon. Though 1,000 fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand side, the pestilence will not reach you. You will only see it with your eyes and be a witness of the punishment of the wicked. And that's what I'm talking about in this whole exhortation, is the great sifter. We're living in these times when we're sifting between one group and another, and we don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I do have one outcome to show you here now. It has brought about the aliyahs to Israel of Jews from all over the world. They're leaving because of COVID to go to Israel, which is pretty amazing. This is in the Jerusalem Post that came out within the month that I was studying this, and Martha turned me onto it. I was really happy about that. Whether it's because of global economic situation, so is dismal due to COVID pandemic, or because Israel has truly become a desirable alternative for the world Jewry, the numbers are impressive. According to the data provided by the Jewish Agency for Israel, more than 20,000 new immigrants and from almost 70 countries made aliyahs in 2020, whether it's because of the global economic situation, or it's repeating itself, I'm sorry. I wanted to get down to the bottom. Some 10,200 came from the Commonwealth of Independent States, including 6,260 from Ukraine and 2,660 from Russia. Another 3,010 arrived from Western Europe, including 2,200 from France, which has had a high amount of anti-Semitism lately, and 460 from Britain. In the end of November, some 2,850 immigrants arrived from North America. I don't know, many times that has not happened in the past because the Jews prefer, in many cases, where they are here, but that now that is changing. 2,550 from the US and the rest of Canada. Another 1,500 came from Latin America, including 510 from Argentina, 460 from Brazil. Aliyahs from Ethiopia is set to surpass 1,200, mostly Falsha Muri, brought to Israel in the second operation dubbed the Rock of Israel, run jointly with the Jewish Agency and the Aliyah and Integration Ministry. Another 219 arrived on the flight on December 22nd, while an estimated 1,000 will remain in the country. In addition, there were 280 immigrants from South Africa and 90 from Australia and New Zealand. The Jewish Agency says it has received about 160,000 inquiries from potential immigrants, while more than 41,000 Aliyah files have been opened, including 28,000 from Western countries. Twice the number opened in 2019. There is also 41% increase in the files opened for the young adults ages 18 to 35 from Western countries. So this is big news. It is one of the vectors to look for at the end of this. It should keep our hope alive, but the great sifter is not done, and we'll probably see many more results after this pandemic is over. But as believers, we have so much to look forward to. We can talk about our faith. We can say, we know these plagues of the past, and here's what they brought about. And this one's no different. It's going to change the world stage, and God is going to bring his will to a close. Thank you.